How to get out of the cycle of fear that's secretly running your life. There's a force quietly shaping every choice you make. It's not logic. It's not fate. It's fear. Not the kind that makes you run from danger, but the subtle kind that convinces you to stay where you are. It hides inside comfort, whispers through hesitation, and becomes the voice that says, "Not now. Maybe later." You've probably called it caution, or reason, or even maturity. But in truth, it's the invisible hand guiding your life from the shadows. Every human being builds a life around what they fear losing. We call it stability. Yet beneath that word lies a quiet surrender, a trade between freedom and safety. Day after day, you reinforce invisible walls made of assumptions, excuses, and emotional shortcuts that keep you from confronting what truly scares you. Uncertainty, rejection, failure, love, truth. These walls become your prison. You decorate them with achievements, distractions, and routines. And you tell yourself you're free, as long as you never try to leave. But here's the paradox. Fear doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you small. It convinces you that peace means the absence of discomfort, when in reality, peace is born from the courage to face discomfort without surrendering to it. Most people never realize how deeply fear organizes their reality. It shapes careers, relationships, beliefs, and even faith. It creates a false sense of order while quietly stealing your potential for growth. Science proves it. Your brain is designed to protect you, not to liberate you. The amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure near the center of your brain, is programmed to detect threat before reason even has time to respond. That's why fear feels faster than thought, because it is. The body reacts, the heart races, the breath shortens, and a chemical chain locks you into survival mode. But if you stay in survival long enough, you begin to mistake it for living. The truth is, you are not broken. You are conditioned. Conditioned by fear loops that your brain repeats like familiar songs. Conditioned by stories that taught you it's better to be safe than to be real. Conditioned by generations of minds that survived by obeying fear, not transcending it. But you are alive in a time when knowledge can break that pattern. Neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy converge to show what the ancients already knew: that liberation begins the moment you can observe your fear without becoming it. This is not a motivational speech. It's a mirror. And as you look into it, you may realize that the cage you've been trying to escape was never locked. It only needed your awareness to open. Because fear doesn't vanish when you understand it. It transforms. And in that transformation lies the beginning of freedom. The invisible prison you built without knowing. Imagine waking up inside a room you've lived in for years. You know every corner, every color, every shadow. You feel safe there. But one day, you notice something strange. A door you've never seen before. It's been there all along, hidden in plain sight. The moment you see it, something inside you shifts. You realize that comfort wasn't freedom. It was containment. This is how fear operates. Not as an intruder, but as an architect. It doesn't attack your walls. It designs them. It builds subtle routines that feel natural, staying silent when you should speak, holding back when you should act, avoiding what could go wrong instead of exploring what could go right. Each small hesitation adds a new brick to the invisible structure of your life, and because it feels safe, you never question it. Psychologically, this process begins early. The mind learns through association. Every time you avoid discomfort, your brain rewards you with a momentary sense of relief. Dopamine reinforces the behavior, not because it's right, but because it feels soothing. Fear becomes disguised as wisdom. You tell yourself you're being smart, when in fact, you're being conditioned. The body relaxes not because you're at peace, but because you've chosen familiarity over growth. René Descartes believed that doubt was the beginning of wisdom. the act of questioning the certainty of your own perceptions. But fear does the opposite. It feeds on certainty. It convinces you that the life you know is the only life you can handle. It replaces curiosity with caution, and slowly, it turns your mind from a compass into a cage. Neuroscience explains this elegantly. The amygdala triggers a rapid chain of stress signals every time you face something unfamiliar. The prefrontal cortex, your center of reasoning, shuts down partially under that stress. You literally lose access to your higher thought when fear takes control. The mind's greatest prison, then, isn't external. It's biochemical. You cannot think your way out of fear until you learn to calm the body that sustains it. But there's a deeper layer still. Fear doesn't just limit your choices, it distorts your perception of reality. You begin to see the world not as it is, but as your fears allow it to be. Opportunities appear risky. People seem untrustworthy. The future looks dangerous, and you start to call that realism. Yet what you call realism might just be the echo of your own fear projected onto everything you see. Breaking free starts with awareness. Not the kind of awareness that judges or suppresses, but the kind that observes without reacting. When you can watch your fear arise like a cloud passing through the mind, you begin to separate who you are from what you feel. In that gap between reaction and recognition lies your freedom. The Stoics understood this centuries ago. It's not what happens to you that defines you, but how you interpret it. So look around your life. Look at the patterns you call stability. Look at the things you defend without knowing why. They may be the bars of an invisible prison built not by circumstance, but by fear disguised as comfort. The moment you see that, truly see it, the door appears. And once it appears, you can never unsee it. When the brain becomes your warden, your brain was never built to make you happy. It was built to keep you alive. Every instinct, every reflex, every surge of panic in your chest is part of an ancient survival code written long before you could speak or reason. But what once protected early humans from predators now traps modern minds inside invisible loops of anxiety. The threat is no longer outside, it's internal, and your brain still treats every uncertainty as if your life depends on it. When the amygdala senses danger, even imagined danger, it sends a rapid distress signal through your nervous system. In milliseconds, adrenaline spikes, cortisol floods your bloodstream, and the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, empathy, and long-term thinking, dims its light. Your biology chooses speed over accuracy. This is why fear feels so much stronger than reason. It's not because you're weak. It's because your body believes that reacting fast will save you, even if it costs you clarity. Andrew Huberman calls this the body-first hierarchy of fear, the fact that your physiology decides before your intellect does. You can't outthink fear when your body is convinced you're in danger. The trembling hands, the shallow breath, the racing thoughts, these aren't random symptoms. They're a synchronized orchestra of survival. But if that orchestra never stops playing, your body starts mistaking daily life for a battlefield. You stop living and start merely managing threat. This is where the mind becomes your warden. Each time you avoid discomfort, you teach your brain that avoidance equals safety. The amygdala learns fast. The next time a similar situation appears, it fires even sooner. The neural pathway strengthens, making fear your default reaction. This is how habits of anxiety are formed, not through trauma alone, but through repetition. You become addicted to the chemical predictability of fear because your nervous system confuses familiarity with safety. Joe Dispenza describes this as memorized survival. Your body remembers fear better than your mind does. Long after the original cause has disappeared, the pattern remains. The thought of change, success, or exposure triggers the same biochemical storm as danger. And so you live inside a feedback loop that keeps you small. The brain imprisons the spirit it was meant to protect. But here's where philosophy and neuroscience intersect. Awareness rewires biology. When you consciously name your fear, you re-engage the prefrontal cortex. The act of observation itself begins to deactivate the alarm. This is not metaphor, it's measurable. Huberman's research shows that labeling emotions reduces amygdala activation. The Stoics knew this truth long before brain scans existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." Science now proves that changing the estimate changes the chemistry. To escape the mental prison, you must become the observer rather than the prisoner. When fear arises, don't resist it. Watch it. Track its path through your body, the tightening chest, the shallow breath, the thoughts that spiral. The moment you can see it, you begin to separate the signal from the self. That distance is liberation in its purest form. Your brain may be your warden, but it's also your key. The same circuits that trap you in fear can be trained to release you from it. The more you confront discomfort with calm awareness, the more you teach your nervous system that survival is not the same as living. Each conscious breath becomes a quiet act of rebellion against ancient code, proof that evolution continues within you, one moment of awareness at a time. The comfort of chaos. At first glance, chaos looks like the enemy. You think of it as disorder, unpredictability, the storm that ruins your plans. But look closer, and you'll notice something unsettling. Part of you feels at home inside it. That's because the mind doesn't crave peace. It craves what it knows. And if what it knows is fear, tension, and uncertainty, then chaos becomes its version of comfort. It's not logical, but it's deeply human. The brain's chemistry explains this paradox. Every emotional state creates a familiar pattern of neurotransmitters, a unique biochemical signature your body learns to expect. When you live with fear long enough, cortisol and adrenaline become your baseline. You begin to feel strangely uneasy when things are calm because your body misses the chemical rhythm of stress. Peace feels unnatural, almost threatening, because it contradicts what your nervous system believes is normal. In that moment, the absence of fear feels like danger. This is why many people unconsciously recreate conflict after periods of calm. They stir arguments, sabotage opportunities, or invent new worries, not because they want pain, but because their nervous system has memorized it. Joe Dispenza calls this addiction to familiar emotions. You're not addicted to fear itself, but to the biochemical certainty it provides. The body prefers the predictable storm to the unfamiliar silence of peace. On a psychological level, this is cognitive dissonance, the mind's discomfort when reality no longer fits its internal narrative. If you've lived believing that life is struggle, success or serenity will feel foreign. You'll instinctively seek the chaos that validates your old identity. Jordan Peterson would call this the return to disorder, the unconscious tendency to recreate the very suffering that once gave your life structure, because without it, you don't know who you are. And yet, Descartes would remind you, the act of doubt is the seed of awakening. When you begin to question your attachment to chaos, you loosen fear's grip. The question isn't, why do I fear chaos? It's, why do I feel safe inside it? That single question shifts the mind from survival to awareness. It creates a space where choice can exist again. Neuroscience shows that change begins in the prefrontal cortex, the region activated by focus and deliberate reflection. When you catch yourself drawn to chaos, and you simply notice it, you engage a higher circuit of control. You're no longer reacting, you're observing. Over time, this conscious recognition rewires your neural pathways. The body learns that calm isn't a threat, it's renewal. That safety isn't the absence of challenge, but the presence of awareness. You must understand, the goal isn't to eliminate chaos. Life will always contain uncertainty. The goal is to stop finding comfort in the pain that limits you. True transformation begins when discomfort no longer feels like home. when silence doesn't trigger panic, when peace doesn't feel empty, when you can stand in uncertainty without needing to fill it with noise. The comfort of chaos was once your shield. It helped you survive what you couldn't control. But you're not surviving anymore. You're awakening. And to awaken, you must let go of the familiar storms that kept you from the calm truth waiting underneath. Because peace is not the absence of movement. It's the moment you stop mistaking turbulence for life itself. The memory of fear in your body. Long before fear becomes a thought, it becomes a sensation. The body feels it first, a tightening in the chest, a subtle contraction in the throat, a weight in the stomach. These are not coincidences. They are echoes of every moment your nervous system has learned to associate with danger. Each experience of fear leaves a mark, not only in your mind, but in the very tissues that sustain your life. You carry your history of fear in posture, breath, and even the rhythm of your heartbeat. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophers intuited. The body and mind are one continuous system. The vagus nerve, running from your brainstem through your heart, lungs, and gut, acts like a bridge between thought and emotion. When the mind perceives threat, this nerve activates the sympathetic response, heart racing, muscles tightening, digestion pausing. It's an ancient reflex meant to help you survive a predator. But when the predator is your own mind, the body becomes trapped in a loop of self-created danger. Andrew Huberman explains that chronic stress reprograms this system. The more often you experience fear, the more sensitive your nervous system becomes to even minor triggers. Your body begins to anticipate threat before it exists. You may wake up already tense, shoulders drawn, jaw clenched, as if bracing for impact. Over time, this state becomes invisible because it feels normal. The body forgets how to relax, and you forget what calm truly means. Psychologically, this manifests as hypervigilance, a constant readiness for something to go wrong. Emotionally, it becomes fatigue, irritability, or the strange sense that life is heavier than it should be. But the real truth is simpler. Your body is remembering. Every unexpressed fear, every suppressed emotion, every moment you chose control instead of vulnerability, all of it left a trace. Your body became the archive of what your mind refused to face. Joe Dispenza calls this the body as the unconscious mind. It means your cells, your breath, even your muscle tone can carry emotional memory long after your conscious mind has moved on. You can tell yourself you're fine, but your pulse still spikes when someone raises their voice. You can rationalize your peace, but your shoulders betray the tension you refuse to name. The body never lies. The path out of this cycle doesn't begin with positive thinking. It begins with awareness. To heal fear, you must first feel it. Not intellectually, but physically. Pay attention to where it lives in you. Does it sit behind your sternum? Does it rise as heat in your throat? Observe it without trying to change it. This act of observation signals safety to your nervous system. It tells your body, you are allowed to feel this. And in that permission, the loop begins to dissolve. Breath is the key that unlocks this process. Slow, deep breathing activates the parasympathetic system, the body's natural state of calm. Andrew Huberman calls this the physiological sigh. A double inhale, followed by a long exhale, that resets the nervous system. With each conscious breath, you're not just calming anxiety, you're teaching your body a new pattern of safety. You're rewriting the code. Fear leaves residue, but awareness is the solvent. The more you reconnect with your body, the less control fear has over it. Over time, you stop mistaking tension for identity. The shoulders drop, the breath deepens, and the body remembers what the mind forgot. That safety is not the absence of danger, but the presence of connection. You can't think your way to peace. You must feel your way there, one breath at a time. The lie of control. Control feels like safety. You plan, predict, prepare, believing that if you can anticipate every outcome, nothing can hurt you. It's a logical illusion that comforts the anxious mind. But beneath that logic lives fear. Control is not peace, it's fear wearing a mask of intelligence. The more you try to command life, the more you confirm to your brain that chaos is dangerous and uncertainty is a threat. You end up reinforcing the very fear you're trying to escape. The mind builds control as a defense mechanism, not as a strategy for growth. It's how you cope with the unpredictability of existence. You fill your days with order, lists, routines, boundaries that keep you in predictable motion. But this constant organization of reality comes at a cost, the slow death of spontaneity. You no longer live, you manage. Every step becomes an attempt to avoid discomfort rather than to experience truth. Descartes sought certainty through reason, but even he warned that doubt must remain alive, because certainty without questioning leads to blindness. The same applies here. Control without awareness leads to paralysis. Neuroscience explains why control feels addictive. When your brain detects uncertainty, it triggers a cascade of stress hormones. Cortisol rises, the amygdala activates, and the prefrontal cortex, your center of reasoning, scrambles to regain order. Each time you succeed in restoring a sense of predictability, dopamine rewards you. You feel relief, not because life is actually stable, but because your brain momentarily silenced its own alarm. You mistake that chemical quiet for control, but it's only a pause in the storm. Fear returns as soon as the next variable appears. The paradox is that control doesn't eliminate fear, it expands it. You start fearing what you can't control: people, emotions, the future, even yourself. You micromanage life to protect yourself from the unknown, but the unknown grows larger the more you resist it. Jordan Peterson often speaks of this tension. That order, when carried too far, becomes tyranny. The structure meant to support you becomes the very system that suffocates you. Too much control kills adaptability. And without adaptability, the soul decays. You can see this in relationships, careers, even spirituality. The partner who tries to control love loses it. The perfectionist who tries to control outcomes loses creativity. The believer who tries to control faith loses connection. Life cannot be dominated. It must be navigated. And navigation requires surrender, not submission, but alignment. To surrender is to accept reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. It's the courage to move with life's current, rather than damming it at every turn. Andrew Huberman would describe surrender as a physiological shift. When you release control, your nervous system transitions from the sympathetic, fight or flight, to the parasympathetic, rest and regulate. Your breath deepens, your heart rate slows, your body signals safety. Surrender isn't weakness, it's biological intelligence. It's the point at which the body and mind agree that not every uncertainty is a threat. True peace begins there. So, the lie of control must collapse for freedom to emerge. The moment you stop clinging to certainty, clarity appears. You begin to see that life doesn't need your supervision, only your participation. Control is fear disguised as strength. Surrender is strength disguised as peace. And the difference between the two determines whether you spend your life defending your comfort or discovering your potential. One path locks you in the illusion of safety. The other opens you to the truth that safety was never found in control. It was found in trust. The illusion of the safe self. You've spent years constructing a version of yourself that feels solid, familiar, and safe. You call it your personality, your identity, your truth. But if you look closely, you'll see that much of what you call you was built as armor, not essence. The safe self is a psychological invention, a collection of roles, habits, and defenses meant to protect you from rejection, failure, and pain. It feels authentic because you've worn it for so long, yet it was never born from freedom. It was born from fear. From childhood, the human mind learns that love and safety are conditional. A frown, a raised voice, a withdrawn touch. They teach you which parts of yourself are acceptable and which must be hidden. Slowly, you start editing your truth. You mute your impulses, filter your opinions, and shape your emotions to fit the world around you. Over time, these small compromises crystallize into an identity that is socially rewarded but internally fractured. You learn to perform stability while silently carrying unease. And you begin to believe that this performance is who you are. Modern psychology calls this the adaptive self. It's not false. It's incomplete. It's the mind's way of ensuring survival in a world that punishes vulnerability. But what begins as adaptation becomes imprisonment. Every time you suppress your truth to maintain approval, your nervous system associates authenticity with danger. Your body tenses, your breath shortens, and the amygdala marks self-expression as a potential threat. The safe self becomes your internal warden, policing your impulses in the name of protection. Montaigne once wrote that the greatest journey is inward, not to find who we are, but to see who we've pretended to be. The illusion of the safe self thrives in the gap between authenticity and acceptance. You start confusing peace with conformity and love with compliance. Yet deep down, your body knows the cost. The unease that lingers after every act of self-betrayal is not anxiety. It's your real self knocking on the walls of the false one, asking to be let out. Neuroscience supports this spiritual truth. Joe Dispenza describes how the brain hardwires the emotional patterns tied to identity. Each time you repeat a behavior, even one that limits you, neurons fire together and strengthen their connection. Over time, the brain becomes addicted to the familiar self it knows, even if that self is miserable. The neural map of who you are becomes fused with your fears. Changing it feels like death because, in a way, it is. The death of an identity your mind built to survive. But death in this context is not an ending, it's rebirth. When you start observing the illusion of the safe self without judgment or resistance, cracks appear in its surface. You begin to see how much of your personality is simply a memory of who you thought you had to be. That realization is terrifying, but also liberating. Because behind the safe self lies something untouched by fear, awareness itself. The awareness that watches, questions, and feels. The awareness that existed before labels, trauma, and performance. Jordan Peterson would call this the integration of chaos, the courage to face the unknown parts of yourself and bring them into order. It's not about destroying the safe self, but expanding beyond it. You can't heal by hating the mask. You heal by understanding why you needed it. The moment you do, its power dissolves. You realize that safety was never the goal. Wholeness was. So ask yourself, who am I when I'm not protecting myself? The answer won't come from memory or logic. It will come from stillness. In that silence, the illusion falls away, and the real self, raw, unguarded, unshaken, begins to breathe again. And that breath, unfiltered and alive, is the sound of freedom returning home. How fear hijacks your future. Fear is not content to live in the past. It wants to shape what's ahead. It doesn't just haunt memories, it quietly scripts the future. Every decision you postpone, every dream you shrink, every risk you talk yourself out of. Fear is there, whispering that safety lies in inaction. The danger isn't that fear paralyzes you once. The danger is that it teaches your mind to associate the future itself with threat. Over time, your imagination, the most creative force you possess, becomes a weapon turned against you. Neuroscience shows that fear and imagination use the same neural networks, the same parts of the brain that allow you to visualize possibility. The hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the default mode network, are also responsible for projecting potential danger. When you picture the future, your brain doesn't distinguish between what's real and what's imagined. It reacts chemically to both. If you imagine failure, your body produces stress hormones as if you've already failed. The future becomes a field of invisible traps long before it arrives. Andrew Huberman explains this as anticipatory anxiety. It's the nervous system's attempt to protect you from imagined harm by preparing in advance. But in doing so, it steals presence. You start living two lives, the one you're in and the one you're afraid of. Your body tenses against events that haven't happened. Your breath shortens at possibilities that exist only in thought. You begin to suffer not from reality, but from prediction. The Stoics called this premeditation of evil, the tendency to suffer more in imagination than in life itself. Marcus Aurelius warned that our anxiety comes not from events, but from our judgments about them. Yet in the modern world, this ancient truth has become magnified by the pace of information. Every headline, notification, and social comparison fuels a constant state of anticipation. The brain, overloaded by stimuli, confuses uncertainty with danger. You become a prisoner of what if. This mental habit has consequences beyond emotion. Fear hijacks the future by narrowing the brain's perception. Under threat, the visual cortex literally focuses more on what could go wrong. You see fewer options, fewer solutions, fewer exits. The field of possibility collapses. That's why, when you're afraid, the future feels small and suffocating. Your biology is filtering out everything but survival. And in survival mode, growth becomes impossible. Jordan Peterson might say that the antidote lies in voluntary confrontation, not running toward danger recklessly, but stepping into the unknown with intention. Each time you face what frightens you, your brain rewires its relationship with uncertainty. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation, begins to associate the unknown not with threat, but with discovery. You stop surviving the future and start creating it. But this shift requires something profound, reclaiming your imagination. The same mental power that fear uses to construct prisons can be used to build freedom. Visualization, once hijacked by anxiety, becomes a tool for transformation when paired with awareness. Picture yourself succeeding, not as fantasy, but as rehearsal. The brain learns by repetition, and each mental rehearsal trains your body to respond to hope with the same certainty it once reserved for fear. You must understand that fear doesn't live in tomorrow. It only lives in thought. The future itself is neutral, a blank canvas waiting for your presence to give it color. When you stop anticipating danger, you stop feeding the illusion that the future must mirror the past. The mind's greatest act of courage is not conquering fear, but refusing to imagine through it. The future is not what's coming. The future is what you're creating, moment by moment, breath by breath. Reprogramming the fear loop. Fear is not an enemy to be defeated. It's a signal to be reinterpreted. The problem isn't that you feel fear, it's that your mind learned to obey it. Every time fear appears, your brain follows a familiar path: trigger, reaction, withdrawal. This loop repeats until fear becomes automatic, an unconscious reflex. But what neuroscience now proves, and philosophy has always suggested, is that this reflex can be rewritten. You can train your brain to experience fear without being governed by it. Inside your mind, neurons that fire together wire together. Each time you avoid a fearful situation, you strengthen the connection between fear and escape. The amygdala becomes faster, more efficient, more controlling. But when you face discomfort intentionally and survive it, you create a competing network, one that links fear to resilience, uncertainty to growth. Over time, the brain begins to associate fear not with danger, but with possibility. You are literally reprogramming the circuitry of courage. Andrew Huberman's research reveals a critical insight. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the regulation of it. Breathing patterns, focus, and body awareness can all shift the brain's interpretation of threat. When you slow your breathing, lengthen your exhale, and maintain soft focus, your body signals safety to the brain. The amygdala quiets, and the prefrontal cortex re-engages. In that calm, you regain access to reason, empathy, and choice. The biology of fear gives way to the biology of control, not the illusion of control, but mastery through awareness. Joe Dispenza calls this installing a new mind. The moment you observe fear without reacting, you interrupt the old program. The neural loop loses its power because it depends on your participation. Observation creates distance, distance creates choice. And every conscious choice builds a new pathway. What was once reactive becomes reflective. You move from being controlled by fear to using fear as a compass, a signal pointing toward the edges of your growth. From a philosophical lens, this is the essence of Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius taught that fear is an invitation to practice courage. The obstacle becomes the path. By stepping into the very situations that once triggered retreat, you reclaim sovereignty over your inner world. Descartes would see this as the exercise of reason over impulse, the triumph of awareness over instinct. You begin to realize that fear is not an external force, but an internal misunderstanding. But reprogramming the fear loop is not an intellectual task, it's experiential. It requires daily engagement with discomfort. Speak when you feel the urge to stay silent. Rest when your fear tells you you're not allowed to slow down. Take small, deliberate risks that contradict your old identity. Each act of conscious defiance teaches your nervous system a new truth: that safety doesn't come from avoidance, but from presence. The brain learns not through thought, but through lived repetition. The Stoics had a word for this process: premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of facing difficulty before it arrives. They understood that courage isn't spontaneous, it's cultivated. In the same way, neuroplasticity demands practice. Each moment you confront fear consciously, your neurons are sculpting a new map of reality. The old loop fades, not because it's erased, but because it's replaced. The unknown, once terrifying, becomes familiar, even welcoming. Reprogramming fear is not about destroying it, it's about integrating it. You don't silence the voice that says, "This is dangerous." You learn to say back, "Maybe, but I'm here anyway." And in that moment, you're not suppressing emotion, you're transforming it. You're teaching your body that fear is not a prophecy, only a perception. And perception can always be rewritten by awareness. That is the true freedom neuroscience and philosophy agree upon. The ability to choose your response even when your instincts demand surrender. The courage to lose what was never yours. At the core of every fear lies one unspoken question: what if I lose what I love? This fear of loss, of control, of certainty, of self, is what keeps you chained to the past and afraid of the future. But here's the paradox. Most of what you cling to was never truly yours to begin with. You don't own certainty. You don't own outcomes. You don't even own the version of yourself you were yesterday. And yet, you spend your life trying to protect these illusions as if your survival depended on them. That's not living. That's maintenance, a constant negotiation with impermanence. The truth is that fear and attachment are twins. You fear losing only what you've confused with your identity. You tell yourself that peace comes from holding on, but peace is born in letting go. Every time you tighten your grip on how things must be, you create resistance. And resistance is the soil where anxiety grows. The more you fight to preserve control, the more your nervous system interprets uncertainty as danger. You become trapped in a cycle of tension that disguises itself as effort, of suffering disguised as responsibility. Philosophers have been warning us about this trap for centuries. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics believed that loss was not tragedy, but truth, the natural rhythm of existence. Meanwhile, modern neuroscience echoes the same wisdom. The brain's fear circuitry becomes hyperactive when it perceives potential loss. It reacts the same way to losing money, status, or love as it does to physical danger. Your biology doesn't distinguish between emotional attachment and survival. It fights for both. But this attachment comes at a cost. When you cling, your brain remains locked in survival mode. Cortisol levels rise, the prefrontal cortex weakens, and rational thought fades. You begin to confuse necessity with dependency. You don't just fear losing something, you fear losing yourself without it. That's why letting go feels like dying. Because in a way, a part of you is dying, the part built around what was never real security. Yet in that death lies a sacred opportunity for rebirth. René Descartes might describe this moment as the dissolution of illusion, the moment when awareness separates from attachment. You realize that identity, like thought, is fluid. You are not what you have. You are not what you fear to lose. You are the awareness that remains when all else fades. Jordan Peterson would call this confrontation with chaos, voluntarily stepping into the unknown and allowing the old self to burn so that the authentic one can emerge. It's the path of transformation that demands you sacrifice comfort for truth. But courage is not the absence of pain. It's the decision to face it willingly. Every act of surrender rewires the brain's association with loss. What once triggered panic begins to signal liberation. Dopamine, once tied to control, becomes linked to growth. The nervous system, conditioned to brace against the unknown, learns to relax into it. You start to see that freedom was never about acquiring more. It was about releasing what was never yours to keep. When you lose the illusion of control, you gain clarity. When you lose certainty, you gain presence. When you lose your false identity, you gain yourself. And in that process, you discover the quiet truth that everything real, love, peace, awareness, doesn't need possession to exist. It thrives in surrender. That's the paradox the fearful mind can't grasp, but the awakened one lives by. To hold nothing is to lose nothing. To cling is to suffer. To release is to be reborn. So the real courage is not in winning, achieving, or conquering. It's in losing consciously, allowing what must fall away to fall. Because when you can look at loss and still remain whole, you've already transcended the fear that once defined your life. You've stopped surviving the world and started belonging to it. The moment you become free. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks or celebration. It comes quietly, like a deep breath after years of holding it in. It begins the moment you stop fighting fear as if it were an intruder and start seeing it as a messenger. Fear has been showing you all along where you were still clinging, where you still believed safety came from control, validation, or certainty. True freedom is born not when fear disappears, but when it loses its authority over your choices. By now you've probably noticed something. Fear never really leaves. It adapts. It changes form. It hides behind logic, humility, even love. But awareness makes it visible. And once seen, it loses its power to dictate. The mind can no longer be ruled by what it fully understands. This is the point where philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience meet. Understanding transforms the structure of experience itself. The moment you perceive fear without judgment, your brain stops treating it as a threat. The amygdala calms, the body relaxes, awareness expands. The signal that once triggered paralysis now becomes a teacher. In that awareness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to recognize the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is automatic, a reflex of the old self. Response is conscious, a creation of the new. One is born from fear, the other from freedom. Neuroscience calls this the shift from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex, from survival to choice. The Stoics called it reason aligned with nature. Descartes called it clear and distinct perception. Different languages for the same awakening, the return of agency. Freedom doesn't mean life stops being uncertain. It means uncertainty stops controlling you. You move through life with an internal steadiness that no circumstance can shake. The external world remains chaotic, but the internal world finds structure in awareness. You become the observer of your emotions, not their hostage. Fear still visits, but it no longer builds its home inside you. It becomes a signal of expansion, a compass pointing toward the edge of your growth. Jordan Peterson often says that meaning is found on the border between chaos and order. Freedom exists there too. It's not a destination, but a practice, a continuous act of choosing presence over panic, curiosity over avoidance, truth over comfort. Each day offers 1,000 small moments to reaffirm that choice. To speak when silence feels safer, to rest when productivity feels like protection, to stay open when withdrawal feels familiar. Each of these moments is a rehearsal for freedom. At the deepest level, freedom is not psychological, it's existential. It's the recognition that you are not your thoughts, not your fears, not your temporary identities. You are the consciousness that watches them arise and fade. The same awareness that existed before the story of fear ever began. Descartes sought proof of existence through thinking, but beyond thought lies something even more fundamental, the silent awareness that observes thought itself. That awareness is the only thing fear cannot touch. When you reach this point, life doesn't suddenly become easier. It becomes clearer. You no longer waste energy fighting the inevitable or defending illusions. You move in harmony with what is, allowing life to unfold without losing yourself in its unfolding. The need to escape disappears because you've stopped being the prisoner. The door was never locked. You just stopped believing in the walls. And so, the moment you become free is not a single instant. It's every moment you choose awareness over fear, every breath that reconnects you with the present, every thought you observe without obedience. Freedom isn't found at the end of the journey. It is the journey. It's the quiet, grounded realization that fear was never the enemy, only the guide leading you back to yourself. You are no longer running, you are awake. And in that awareness, untouched and unafraid, you finally remember what it means to be alive.